Raven Simone is not as fictional as I would like for her to be. However, she is most certainly found in a number of series on television and in movies, and those things that she teaches us are most certainly in some ways valid, while in other ways bound with stupidity, hers. However, Raven Simone teaching us lessons through movies and television like that's so anyway, most certainly is a sentiment that echoes itself in today's quotation from Karen Bowers, an NFA Hall of Famer. She says, "Sometimes the words of a fake wizard are all you need to find your way home." And when we look at these words from Karen Bowers, who really is a lovely woman, we find ourselves understanding simply that fiction should not be as stigmatized as it is in impromptu speeches. That's my thesis. And the reason that is my thesis is because Karen Bowers says that sometimes you need the words of a fake wizard to find your way home, a home that is real, which you can reach with the words of a fictional wizard. Ta-da! And so, in order for us to prove this notion, we'll look to two arguments. The first is that fiction unites very distant groups. And the second is that exploring unfamiliar words highlights what we don't want to believe. In the exact same way that Karen Bowers points out that sometimes the words of a fake wizard are very relevant, it is crucial we too come to recognize magic comes from the most unsuspecting of places. Even in this round, it could come from fiction. And so in order for us to prove this notion, we look to the first reason that we should not stigmatize fiction as much as we do. That being, fiction unites very distant groups. There are two examples that we can look to prove this point. The first is Stormin Stufflin's interpretation of Little Miss Muffet, and the second is the Yoruba religion. Initially, Stormin Stufflin's interpretation of Little Miss Muffet is centered around a St. Louis public school that really most certainly likes to identify itself with a lot of students from different ethnic backgrounds. They have students from India, students from Asia, but one of the things that they do most often via a program called Monster Tales is host programs from Little Miss Muffet, the old story tale that we all listened to as children. But in doing so, they hope to allow children from all of these different ethnic backgrounds to come together under this one umbrella, learning things not only about each other, but about Little Miss Muffet sitting on her tuffet or whatever it was. It's this sentiment that highlights the notion that when we portray fictional stories or provide them as a unifying point for groups, it bridges the gap that we might not be able to do without those fictional stories that transcend spaces. But further, when we look to the Yoruba religion, we find this exact same sentiment proven. Practiced in East Africa, the Yoruba religion is most certainly a sentiment that highlights fictional stories, parables, if you will. But these parables unify people from different nation states in Africa because you know it's not all one country. This most certainly highlights the notion that by drawing on the Yoruba religion, the parables therein, these people become united despite their inherent distance. But they wouldn't be as united if they said they only wanted to hear stories that were true, because oftentimes those stories only come in the mother tongue of one nation state. Essentially, by looking to both Little Miss Muffet and the Yoruba religion, we've proven, as Karen Bowers would suggest, that fiction unites distant groups. And that's why we shouldn't stigmatize it as much as we do. Just like we shouldn't stigmatize fake wizards, Disney World. But when we look at this quotation from Karen Bowers, we also find the notion that when we explore unfamiliar words, it highlights exactly what we don't want to believe. And that is most certainly the case as it pertains to impromptu. That's why we stigmatize fiction, because we think that if we put it out there, it might highlight a notion that we don't exactly agree with because it's not true. That's not at all the case. And so in order for us to prove that exploring unfamiliar words highlights what we don't want to believe, we can look to two examples. The first is Taye Diggs, and the second is Billie Holiday. Taye Diggs is married to a white woman, my dream. Just kidding. However, he's married to a white woman. He has a mixed son, and he's argued that his mixed son has a lot of problems dealing with being mixed race. And he says that the reason that's the case is because lots of people tell him that he's just a mixed child, and essentially that makes him black because of the one-drop rule. But Taye Diggs argues that we need to make sure that we see ourselves as holistically who we are. Essentially, he's saying that exploring these unfamiliar words from people who aren't within his family, who hold his ideals, highlight exactly what he doesn't want his son to identify with. The notion that he is a certain way just because people say he is. But we find this exact same sentiment proven when we look to Billie Holiday. After she started recording the song Strange Fruit, which was an allegory for lynchings in the Black South, white Americans who were unfamiliar with that type of activism refused to allow her into their clubs and nightclubs of certain orders. Essentially, because they weren't familiar with her words, they refused to have her there, shutting her out, essentially highlighting what they did not want to believe. So when we look back at Karen Bauer's words, sometimes all you need are the words of a fake wizard to find your way home. It's evident that fiction should not be as stigmatized as it is in impromptu speeches, because it shows us exactly how we can develop, and it highlights distant groups, but most certainly proves that Raven-Symoné should stick around, unfortunately.